So some of this you all probably know already, okay, but I'm gonna go ahead and give you a little bit, because I learned some things when I looked for more information about Greg, his background, and looked for some, saucy stuff. There wasn't a lot of sauce.
The statute is run on most of that stuff.
So Greg was appointed the 25th state librarian by our former governor, Governor Jerry Brown, in March of 2014, so 8 years plus now. And I think I've known, maybe counting you, 4 state librarians in the state. I've been around long enough that I've known, yeah. Ethel Crockett, I think, was my first state librarian. Before becoming state librarian, however, Greg was the Capitol Bureau Chief for the San Francisco Chronicle, where he covered politics and policy at the state capitol for nearly 20 years. His tenure as state librarian, the priorities that he had have included improving reading skills for children throughout the state, putting library cards in the hands of every school kid, and providing Californians with the information that they need, no matter what community they live in. By the way, if you don't know this already, this is incredible. The state library has a record budget, $671 million. Try putting that in your piggy bank. This year, which is $430 million of that is going to represent a large investment in local libraries, and there's a program for that right now, facilities program. So since 2015, the state library has improved access for millions of Californians by helping connect them to half of the state's 1,100 libraries to a high-speed network, linking universities, colleges, schools, and libraries around the world. So Greg holds a master's in library science from San Jose State. Go Trojans, or Spartans, excuse me.
Spartans.
The other school. You're a Spartan and a Trojan.
Right.
Because you also got...
And a tree, I guess, or a color, whatever Stanford is.
It's a redwood tree, isn't it? The tree.
Yeah, I think that's the mascot, I think we're cardinal, the color, as opposed to, no one expects the French Revolution cardinal, right? Or the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, Greg, thank you for being with us today. We're going to talk about your leadership journey. How did you get from point A to point B and beyond? So, you followed what I would call, and maybe us here would call, a non-traditional path to becoming one of the highest, most visible library positions in this country, California State Librarian, which is, by all counts, the 5th largest economy in the world. Former Governor Brown, as I mentioned, appointed you state librarian in 2014. And for those of you who didn't know this, his appointment was controversial, in part because you had no, if not limited, professional library experience. You did, however, go on to get your library degree shortly after your appointment at San Jose State. So aside from getting your library degree, Greg, what else did you do to prepare yourself for the leadership position at the state library?
I think the best thing that prepared me for this job is the 20 to 25 years of being a newspaper reporter, of covering the Capitol. And so while some of the challenges and the issues in facing libraries and the changing ways that people share information, while that was new to me, my temperament, my background, my experience was in asking questions, in talking to people and finding out what's going on. And I think that plus the ability to synthesize information and tell a good story, that's been really, really helpful, because ultimately in interactions with the people in the White Sepulchre here down the street, with the checkbook, I mean, it's about being able to connect with them, right? To talk to them about how does this benefit your community? How does this benefit you? And to be able to tell stories about what's actually happening in libraries, because still a lot of people that think it's all like kind of Ray Bradbury and stuff, the cat glasses on a chain, right?
Right. So, well, Greg, kind of related to that, there's a political dimension to your job, and
It is less important that I know how to catalog than I know how to get a legislator across the street to support libraries.
So what are some of the techniques you've used for that? I mean, is there a trick? I mean, is there envelope under the table that goes from hand to hand, or how does that work?
I think it's demonstrating the value of taking the action that you're suggesting, right? So we in this room would all say it's important to invest more in libraries. Okay, well, how do you prove that to someone who doesn't view libraries as their top priority? There's different arguments that are more compelling to different sorts of audiences, right? So some people really respond to the value of the investment. So we've got the pages on the state library website, right, about the value of investing in libraries. And there's, I don't know, what, 80 studies, something like that, that talk about how you put in $1, you're gonna get $3 to $6 out of that investment. There's other people that respond to like seeing just an amazing story time, right? And that's, in fact, that's been one of the, there aren't a lot of them, but one of the pluses to the pandemic is the digital demonstrations of how much libraries do that can be easily like sent, like you don't have to come to a story time necessarily to see how extraordinary that is. And like I say, it depends on the person.
Right.
And I think being armed with information is the most effective tool. And I was saying earlier this morning, I got set at a table at a luncheon the other day with a Republican lawmaker from Tulare. And we started talking about the Porterville Library. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, you know, I mean, his jaw didn't drop or anything, but like he was kind of impressed that I knew that what the issues were in Porterville and that they were moving to an 8,000 square foot place and the applications that had been filed and stuff like that. So I made a point, in part because I like it, but visiting local libraries. So the odds increase that if I'm thrown into a situation with someone, I can speak to the issues they care about, right? Because I've been to their library, I've been to their community.
That makes a lot of sense.
And like, you don't learn shit in Sacramento except how to say no better. So, I mean, all the cool ideas aren't coming from here.
Right. Well, it reminds me of a little story of my own when I had a chance to meet with this guy by the name of Earl Graves. And Earl was the publisher of a magazine, which I think is still in print, called Black Enterprise magazine. Mm-hmm. And he came to my office and he was wanting to know more about the library, and he said, I didn't do my homework, which is what you're kind of alluding to. You got to know these folks and know what their interests are. Well, we had some drinks out for him, and one of them was a Coke, you know, and he says, you didn't do your homework. If you did, you would have known that I was the biggest distributor of Pepsi. We'll see you later. So, you know, being a state librarian, you're in a position of leadership, not only with the legislature and your staff, but also the communities that you are working with. I guess technically you're kind of the supervisor of the county librarians in the state as well.
No.
No?
Go ahead.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit. What do you see as the difference between leadership, being in a leadership position, and being a leader? How are those two different? Are they the same thing?
I have trouble making a distinction. I think if you're in a leadership position, you have to make decisions, because for better, for worse, you're like the buck stops here, right? The Harry Truman thing, right? So it stops at my desk, and my job is to make decisions. And so whether you perceive that as being a leader as, you know, in the sort of on the white charger sense or whatever, just de facto by making the decisions, right, you're creating a direction, you're pointing the library in that direction. Like I'm telling you what you know already, right? There's never enough dough to do what you want. So it's all about like, okay, what's the most important thing to do right now? What is it that is our top priority, right? What is it that has to wait, you know, as much, and I'm bad at that. Like I want to do everything like yesterday, as Lena and other people at the library will tell you. But I mean, it's just the nature of the position requires leading. Like even if you don't want to, right?
What about some of those decisions? Have you ever made one that you kind of said, "Oh man, I guess that was I decided too quickly"? Any regrets? And leaders don't always have, they don't always make the right decision.
No, and I know that I've made, not the best decisions, but I don't really have regrets. There really isn't time. I mean, I was telling, again, this morning, I mean, the most amount of growth I've seen in myself over the past 8 years is when I started, I was too stupid to know how stupid I was. And now I'm smart enough to know how stupid I am. So, it sounds hokey, but I mean, I think that's made us at the library like a stronger team by now me deferring to the people that know more than me and saying, hey, go, right, do it. And I think it's, I don't know how much of it is me, but when I started, there were 130 people at the library, and now there's 170. And we're getting these people because we're being given more responsibilities. And so, for whatever reason, if we're being given more responsibilities, there's a perception by the people who hand out responsibility that we're doing a good job. Like they don't give you more work to do if you suck, right?
Right.
So.
Well, there's also a trust factor in there. I think, you've had 8 years to kind of build your portfolio, if you will, demonstrate to the folks that you've got, who hold those purse strings, to be able to say, where they've got confidence in your leadership, confidence as a leader, you as a leader.
Well, we benefit a lot at the state library from the positive perception that people across the street have of what local libraries are doing. I mean, it's false, right? But there's a thinking that somehow, like, we ride shotgun over local libraries when in fact, right, you ride shotgun over yourselves, or your city council or county board of supervisors does. I mean, what are we really? I mean, like 95% of the money or more for local libraries comes from your locality. Doesn't come from us. I mean, we can help set the tone and amplify the messages that you're putting out there.
See, I thought there was a provision in the state statutes.
There is. So the state librarian is required to meet, what is it, Miguel? It's like once a year with the county librarians. And it's a vestige of the early 1900s when they had this guy, I used to identify with this guy quite a bit, Jim Gillis. Jim Gillis was a railroad executive. And these were the days at the beginning of the 20th century where the railroads ran government. And there had to have been a meeting, right, where it's like, hey, Jimmy Gillis, he's looking for work, but it's like, Jim Gillis, we gotta get him a job, but like we don't want him to do any harm or nothing, so what, and somebody at the table, right, said, aha! State librarian. And so they sent this guy over to be the state librarian. He has no previous, he's a railroad guy, right? So they sent him over.
Or a journalist.
Yeah, well, hey. I'm not sure it's quite that close of an analogy. But so he comes over and he goes, wow, this is like felony stupid. The state has all the books and then puts them in the mail to localities. Why don't we create a system of local libraries and empower them to have the books and invigorate their own communities? And so, somehow he gets that done, right? And creates this county library system. And so one of the vestiges left over is for having the state librarian talk to county librarians. The California State Library helped create, I'm not saying we should keep it the way it is, but the interlibrary loan system, working with a professor in the 1880s, maybe, at UC Berkeley. I had no idea, so.
Well, it must be wonderful sitting at you have a grand office. I'm assuming you're still in that same beautiful office at the Library Courts building?
I have a nice office, yes.
Let's talk a bit about kind of the leadership competencies, just in a general way. I'm not specifically thinking about you necessarily, but the American Library Association has about 14 areas of competencies for leadership, including things like change management, communication skills, team building, you alluded to some of that, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution. When you're out there, which of those competencies kind of play best for you? And when you're looking to hire people, what are you looking for?
Just parenthetically, that list, right?
Yes.
So how many things are on there?
14.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just sort of, you couldn't have picked the top 5.
It was done by committee.
All right.
It reminds me, I don't know how many of you are in Boy Scouts. In Boy Scouts, right, they had a thing where you go, a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, brave, clean, and reverent.
Yeah.
And we always used to add, and we'd add, right, thrifty, I forgot thrifty, but we'd add the end, like, and modest, right, So here's a list of these 14, like, management things. I mean, to answer your question, I mean, what's most prized by me is, and I don't know where it fits on that thing, but so if we have a challenge, what's the challenge, right? Do we have all of the information we need, right, to assess what the reality of the situation is, and then whoever brings it up, right, has ideas or suggestions on how we meet the challenge. I mean, there isn't a single person in this room, right, who hasn't had somebody come in and just dump some big steamer on your plate and go, hey, I'm done, right, I'm out.
The imagery here.
But it's a thing that happens, and, nobody comes to me unless they're having trouble figuring out what to do with it. And I think the benefit that we have at the library is having a terrific, I think we call ourselves a senior staff, but I mean, Rebecca Wendt, our deputy state librarian, Liz Vieira, who's the administrative person, has been there like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 months longer than me, so she's seen this whole evolution.
Yeah.
And we can bounce ideas off of each other, and it's a very, very collaborative process. And to a person, we will say, that person is awesome because they come in, right, with a challenge we have to deal with, and they have suggestions. We don't always do it like the way they say, but it's like, as a reporter, the worst thing was always like a blank sheet of paper, right? So somebody could give me like 4 paragraphs, and I'll completely change it and edit it or ball it up and throw it away and write it again.
But you have something to work
But
with.
having something to start with
Yep.
is really, really helpful, for me anyway.
So what
But
about
all of those elements,
Yeah.
right? So there's different things that come up at the
Exactly.
library where team building is the piece that makes that work.
Right.
And then there's other situations where it's like, oh, hey, we gotta ramp, let's take a step back, right? And another step back, right? Like conflict resolution.
Right.
But,
Yeah, at different times they come to different, they surface depending on where you're at.
well, it's like there's a guy, I don't know who it is, but one of the leadership writers, all the books, talks about how there's times where you have to be on the dance floor, and there's other times where you want to be on the balcony looking down at the dance.
Right.
And so, I mean, different circumstances sort of direct you to those different, that ever so short list by the ALA of important leadership skills.
Before we go to the next question, I want to tell people there's cards on the table. We're going to collect them if you have questions you want to ask Greg about his leadership, or any questions related to leadership. That's the theme and topic we're focusing on here today. And I want to mention that, for the last 8 years, Greg, you've been a great supporter of leadership development in the state for, whether it's developing leaders in California libraries, or before that, the REPA programs. I want to thank you and thank the state library for their investment in many people who have gone through those programs.
Thanks. I think mentoring is a very, very valuable investment. I mean, to make that opportunity available to people, and there's really no substitute for that. And it's telling you what you know already, but it's a different kind of relationship than just kind of a you and I as co-workers kind of thing.
So you guys are now in the middle of finishing up a new strategic plan for the library, the 5-year LSTA plan, right?
We have to do a 5-year plan to satisfy the federal government, or they don't give us the money that we give out to local libraries.
But there has to be some truth in there. You gotta wanna do some of these things, right? You gotta, no?
Well, if you can walk to the truth from there, it's okay, but, as long as it's kind of within walking distance. But no, I mean, the plan is only as good as it reflects the priorities of California libraries, right? So, I mean, you know this is kind of a loaded question, but I mean, we got all of the input from local libraries that helped design the plan, because, I mean, it doesn't do a lick of good if it's just what we think is cool, right?
Well, I forgot that you're also a journalist, so you can kind of shape the words to fit the box kind of thing.
Well, it isn't, I mean, it's,
I know it's more than that, excuse me.
right, but so we do these things every 5 years. So we did one 5 years ago. This one is a significantly different document. And at its center are issues like equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging that weren't present in the last one. The last one had 6 or 7 goals. And that we could do a better job addressing 6 or 7 goals now because we have more capacity. But at the time, it prevented us from really, answering the difficult question, which is what is the most important thing to do right now? Like what should priority 1 be? And we had this kind of more diffuse document. This one has 5 at most.
It's not out yet, right?
No, we gotta finish it up here by the end of the month, I think. But it has 5 goals at most, and one of them involves like data and the collection of information to demonstrate, right, that you're meeting the other 4. So it's a very different document, both in tone and substance. And, part of that is because like things have changed,
To say the least. So how do you then, as a leader, kind of make sure that that plan going forward is implemented, it's effective, you need to make a detour? I mean, how do you drive that bus?
Yeah, you gotta circle back. I mean, it's building the habit of not looking at it as a completed project by completing the plan.
Yep.
And in the past, and I'm, super guilty of this, so think about websites, right? So there's still a perception by a lot of people that your website or a library website or whatever your business's website is you've updated it and now you're done. That project is over. When in fact, like it has to be now because things are changing and people's tastes and everything else, it has to be embedded in kind of the daily work process. And, similarly, right? So who are you trying to reach with social media, right? Who's the audience that's most interested in this thing that you're doing? So it's about kind of decision-making and forcing yourself to come back and take a look either every, 6 months is ideal, right?
Right.
Okay, so here are the things we're gonna do this year, right, that do this. I think another thing, at least on that plan, is the federal government is really rigid about, they're really rigid about a lot of stuff, but they say like you can give somebody a year's worth of money for a project. So we can't go, hey, we love your project, we're in for 5 years, here's 5 years worth of money. What we can do is we can say, hey, we love your project, it's a 5-year project, we're in, for a year. God willing, the federal government's still around, they still have money, they send us some of the dough, then, once the second year comes along, there's a second year's worth of money. And so so we've spent some time talking to the federal, the Institute for Museum and Library Services to find out what, floats their boat and what doesn't.
Right.
So it turns out that, you can only make a 1-year commitment, but if you say what I just said, right, we get that it's a 5-year project, and so we have the ability to invest over a longer period of time.
That makes sense.
But doing that is better, but it demands more review, right? Because otherwise, your plan has gone 3 years and you haven't looked at it, and then you turn around and go, what the hell? Like, I don't
Review is
get
good
it.
because, as you said, things change. I mean, 2019, we didn't know this pandemic was coming like it is, and so all those best laid plans ended up somewhere else. You mentioned equity, diversity, and inclusion, and, whether it's a boardroom or, corporate boardroom or board organizations or libraries or universities, we're all kind of struggling with, how to create equity, diversity, and inclusion in the work that we do. I wonder if you could, not necessarily saying what quoting the plan you're working on, but you mentioned that as being kind of one of the areas that will be different this time. Are there areas there that, you know, within EDI that you would like to see the state library take a leadership role in?
Yes, I mean, we do that already by using it as a yardstick in taking a look at local applications. I think, I mean, the feedback I get from some people is that it's, and several of us, the keynote speaker kind of spoke very eloquently on this last night, but it's difficult for people sometimes to, like, it's equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's this thing, right? It's a hard concept to sort of, to capture, and I find it easier personally to think about it as belonging, right? And that's a very tangible thing that you can sense just from, you know, you and I hanging out together, right? Are you comfortable here? Do you feel like you're being heard? And I think it's incumbent more so than any other place on the planet for California to be champions of this. I mean, we're the most diverse group of people that have ever been brought together as equals in the history of human civilization. There's 200 and something languages and dialects spoken here. And, right, if libraries are, you know, to be the amazing, to truly be, right, the network of local libraries for the 5th largest economy, I mean, there have to be people on, you know, on the service side of the counter that are like the people that are coming into the library. I mean, it's just kind of, like, you can't, in California, you can't get around that. And I think the other thing that amazes me, and I see it when I travel and visit libraries, is, you know, when you strip it all away, it's our diversity at the bottom that's the greatest strength. The people who are here in California, like, we're not at each other's throats, you know, largely speaking, certainly in other things, and by our proximity to each other, I mean, we learn so much, we become so much more knowledgeable and tolerant and empathetic to other people's points of view. Like, that does not exist, right, in South Dakota. I'm not capping on South Dakota or anything, but I mean, what we have here is such an extraordinary gift, that anything we can do to nurture that is, it's not just like the right thing to do, it's like we have to do that because of who we are.
Let me push on that a little bit, because one of the areas that the state library might have some influence in is diversity on the state library staff. What's your thinking about diversifying the workforce at the state library? You know, the local libraries are doing their thing.
I think the more diverse it could be, the better.
Well, what's the plan? What's the strategy?
We interview all of the candidates we can, and we're somewhat limited by the state's sort of hiring rules. Like, we don't have, you know, the latitude. My wife runs a public affairs firm with 30 employees, and she's got a lot more latitude in establishing our priorities are X, right? And the state's okay about it. I thought one of the coolest things from the pandemic was, so that we wouldn't prejudice judgment, we would do Zoom interviews without the screen on, like in case somebody had crappy connectivity or something like that. And that was really, you know, that was a really interesting and I think helpful sort of, I don't know that that was the intent, but it was really helpful in thinking beyond sort of some of the traditional.
Yeah, I've seen some techniques like that where they actually ask people to leave their names off, and there's,
Yeah.
you know, so you're kind of blind interviewing folks. So I'm gonna mention some names to you, and then we'll talk about this in terms of leadership. So over the past few years, California in particular has generated a cohort of library leaders locally on the national scale. So, you know, these are names
Not the
known.
least being Patty Wong.
Patty Wong.
Okay.
And now we're talking about Lesa Kanani Opua Losada Palayo. I got that out.
How many times does that happen? Where the president of the ALA for 2 years running is somebody from California? Not at all.
I think you might be right.
But anyway, sorry,
Yeah. Well,
do your
okay.
thing.
My point is, Ray Pun, we've got Romelia Salinas, who will be the president of Reforma coming in, Janae Brown, who's now going to be president of the California Library Association, a very diverse pool of people coming out of California, which is, California.
As there should be.
Right, right. So, several, if not all these folks have participated in the leadership development programs that you guys have funded. What are you going to do to continue, to support the leadership development needs of California's next generation of library leaders, so we can continue that pipeline?
Yeah, I think what our plan is we've made a ongoing annual commitment to pay for CALL, which is sort of the career development tool that we've created on the website. And we're combining things like this get-together between you and I under that umbrella, which helps to ensure that there's a steady funding stream for it. Yeah, so we can't do, the LA County library system, right, has 86 libraries and a budget of $280 million. So this one year, we happen to have a $671 million budget, and we're gonna go back to about 70 million next year. Like, we don't have the capacity we have the capacity to put information and create opportunities that local libraries could take advantage of. But we can't pay for, an overhaul of the library system, nor should we, right? I mean, the coolest thing about libraries, right, is how each one of you here delivers a different kind of service based on the community that you serve. So
you've been in the job 8 years now. You came to the job with, you said,
less shiny hair,
okay,
fewer wrinkles.
But you probably had some kind of an expectation or vision of what you're walking into then. How has that vision changed now for you after 8 years?
Well, if any of you repeat it, I'll deny it. But, I must say that my initial perception of the job is not what the job is. And
What was your initial impression?
I thought it was kind of... No, I thought it was kind of like Dr. Starr, right, who was like this terrific historian. He was kind of the California state historian, and he'd go around and give speeches and tell some cool stories about California history. And I became aware right away when they put the briefing book in front of me that there were a lot more responsibilities and areas where the state library could make an impact. And what makes this my dream job is that it can be, whoever occupies it, it can kind of be what you want it to be. You can have it be like Dr. Starr liked it being, the California state historian. But my two immediate predecessors, I mean, not counting Jerry McGinnity, who was like the acting state librarian, but even with Jerry, like Susan Hildreth and Stacy Aldridge, their priorities were for libraries. And because that's the world they came from, right? Like Susan worked for Dr. Starr when he was the librarian in San Francisco. But what came to me after getting the job and visiting local libraries was, it's a little bit hokey, but I spent 25 years as a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle covering the state capitol and politics. And boy, did that make me cynical. And I've never felt more optimistic about the future, and it's because of what I see and saw then, right, happening in local libraries. It's extraordinary. Don't ever for a second underestimate the magic, right, that you all make happen, right? For the look, what's the ALA thing? Didn't they have something like libraries transform or something?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a crappy PR thing, but it happens to be true, And so that's what really changed my mind on it. And by temperament, I prefer trying to find ways where we can provide more help to local libraries, because that's where the good things are happening. Now, that being said, there's an internal function of the state library where I'm over flattering us, but we're kind of like California's Library of Congress. And there's a huge responsibility that we have to get our house in order, to make it easy for Californians to find what they're looking for when they want to find it. Like, my daughter's 30, right? And so I was telling her, it's like, oh, Katie, we have some incredible stuff, and, you know, like blah, 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 and this and that. And she goes, oh, well, how do I get it? I was like, well, you know, if you come between the hours of 9 to 4:30 at the library, and she just bursts into laughter, right? It's like, really? Like, what century are you living in, old man? And so one of the great things in this year's budget is we created a 5-year plan for ourselves. Where do we want the state library to be? And that includes the outward-facing grant-making work that we do with libraries. But where do we need to be 5 years from now to be worthy of the state library, the 5th largest economy? And by doing that, right, the checkbook writer people, put $12 million into our budget to not only digitize more images, to clean up, you know, make it easier for people to find them, but also to go through our catalog, right, and get out some of the antiquated, you know, awful language that used to be used. I mean, for all of my talk about diversity in California, what did the state library collect for years and years and years? My history, right? Old white men history. And some of the most fascinating stories, some of the stories that say the most about who we are as Californians, are from groups of Californians whose history was never taken care of or taken seriously until the last 20 or 30 years. And there's money in the budget, thank God, for us to go out and fill those kind of holes in our collection, and to be able to work with like local archives and museums to showcase the cool stuff that they have. So that's very exciting for me.
So, a couple of years, it'll be 10 years, and Greg Lucas's legacy at the state library and for libraries in California, what is it?
I don't know, I don't really think about that. I mean, it's kind of, okay, what's the most important thing to do now?
Well, maybe you think of it this way. What are the things that you hope to accomplish in your tenure
Well,
here?
so the law that governs the relationship between the state of California and the 1,130 local libraries was written in 1977. So it's 45 years old. It was designed to foster universal library usage, so that, I'm making it up, if Santa Ana, if like Menlo Park would charge $60, right, if you didn't live in Menlo Park to use the library. The point of this law was so that, it would open the doors of all libraries to all Californians. And so it's written in 1977, so like there isn't a lot of stuff about the digital, movement of information. But since that, in the intervening 45 years, 4 of the 5 sections of the law have been eliminated because it costs money. So one of the things I would like to see is a rethinking, like we're in the last innings, right, of the first quarter of the 21st century. And the network of there's a statewide interest in strengthening the network of 1,130 libraries, because the stronger libraries are, the more successful all these other things that the state of California is trying to do are, right? From early learning to addressing homelessness, to ensuring wellness, right, in families, to connecting people with the social services they need, right? I mean, to say nothing of the 100,000 programs that happen in libraries. So, this is windy, but to answer your question, I mean, I'd like to see something that says, and it could be this simple, right? If you walk into a library in any place in California, we, the state of California, will guarantee you'll get the following services. Now, if you're like Beverly Hills and you want to do the following services plus, hey, that's all cool. But, to ensure access to opportunity and equity, something from the state that says, whatever it is, right? Whatever you establish this minimum level of service as, and then the state commits to that. Because there's stuff the state can do, better than localities. And the one thing we do better than any local jurisdiction will ever do is online stuff. Because inevitably, it's cheaper for the state to buy a statewide subscription than if you all get individual subscriptions to the same stuff. This thing that we're doing now, right, where we're putting Coursera into the hands of every library, LinkedIn Learning, was it a soft skills set, something like that. And there's 2 or 3 other ones, right? So I thought it was cool, but then I went on Coursera. And so if I wanted to do what we're making available to every Californian through 24 million Californians through their libraries on Coursera, well, it's like $300 a year. So, right, for that kind of subscription. So we've effectively, well, if you were allowing Californians to go try and do that themselves, there's a huge number of Californians that are shut out of that opportunity just because of the cost threshold. Similarly, like Link Plus, like that ain't cheap. And, poking around like without doing a lot of thought. I mean, if I wanted to do all the stuff that you are making available free to Californians to help them improve their lives, upskill, hey, I'm sick of being in the hospitality industry, I want to do something else. I want to get the mechanical certification that allows me to go, build robots, right? We're making all that happen, and if somebody were to try to do that on their own, that's $1,000. Or like Career Online High School, where you can go online through your library, right, and get a high school degree. I mean, so.
Do we have any questions for Greg?
There can't possibly be any questions.
Come up and just go ahead and stand there and give your question. All right?
I'll let it go.
There you go.
I'd prefer to answer this one.
So what makes some libraries pull out of Link Plus?
Well, it's the ongoing expense primarily. I mean, there's a cost to Link Plus. I mean, everyone, yes, like it's often the annual subscription fee that you pay. And so libraries can't afford the continued subscription. I mean, I think in some ways, I'm not capping on Link Plus, but I think it's a more primitive sort of way of moving things back and forth, and potentially we could do better. We, as a state, working together without the sort of the environmental consequence of putting a bunch of books on a truck and moving them from place to place, or putting them in boxes and putting them on a plane and all the carbon footprint that brings along with it. I mean, there's people that, not a supporter of this necessarily, but there's people that have explored using drones to move books back and forth. There was a famous story about a teacher, I think she was in Virginia, maybe, and did that as part of her class. It was pretty cool, but I mean, she got a lot of grief for it and she's not doing it anymore. Answer your question?
Thank you. So, Greg, I have another question. And this was true in the developing leaders for California libraries. The last year, I think 81% of our participants were from public libraries. There were a few from special. There was one from a law library and a couple from academic as well. So what part of the academic or non-public library, I should say, is part of your vision for what you described?
Yeah, I think for me, the area that needs the most attention by the state of California is teacher librarians in our public schools. So, like if you stood on my shoulders, there's a stack of studies taller than the two of us that says kids do better in an academic environment in which there is a teacher librarian. Teacher librarian, right, is somebody who has the dual degree, right? You got a library degree and a teaching credential, right? And of course, the dirty secret is, right, that teacher librarians are of equal, if not more, benefit to the actual classroom teachers, because they help put together these learning plans and things like that, and then create kind of outside activities that reinforce what the teacher is doing in the classroom. But California, right, 6 million kids in public schools, we have 900 teacher librarians. So, I mean, just to put it in perspective, right, so there's $100 billion they've identified as this one-time tax windfall, billion with a B. For $25 million, you could pay for 1,000 teachers to go get, right, a library credential, right, and double the number of teacher librarians in school. And so it's a vexing thing, right? So because you could be a school district and say, God damn it, you know, we need more teacher librarians here, but there aren't teacher librarians to hire. So it's it's a chicken and egg thing. You've got to build the capability for there to be, you know, a core, if you will, or sort of a market for teacher librarians. At the same time, you build an understanding of the value of having them on campus.
And you can't force those local governed school districts to hire these people, and they have other priorities, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think so, you know, when the internet was what, 95? So a lot of the people who are in or running things now came of age, or like, you know, when the internet was the thing. And I think we're all learning, some of us faster than others, that it isn't all there on the internet, right? Like the internet is not a substitute for libraries. The internet is not a substitute for teacher librarians. I mean, you know, how many times has somebody come in with something that they would never, ever find doing a Google search? Right? And it's, again, it comes back to, we live in an age where there's an infinite amount of information that's available to anybody. So what is value in an infinite world of information? It's you. It's somebody who can find the needle for somebody in the infinite information haystack. And yet, right, there's a perception that somehow, right, that libraries aren't valuable. We're the most valuable thing right now, in my opinion.
Are there any other questions? Yes?
Most important tool a leader needs to face a world that is quickly changing.
What's the most important tool that a leader needs in a world that's changing?
It's flexibility, right? You've identified the problem. There's a guy, I want to say he was the library director from Salt Lake City, and they have the time. And so it has to be flexibility and the ability to change and shift gears. And almost to a person, like really rockin' library directors who I've talked to, that's what they say is essential, is you can't fall in love with your own bullshit, which is, you know, something I've seen, something I've done, but not for very long, you know. But
Greg, any last words of wisdom for this audience tonight?
I didn't know there were any initial words of wisdom. But,
Well, you sure made it sound like you had a lot of wisdom.
no, like I said, if I didn't say it as explicitly as this, my success as state librarian, and I think our success as the state library, is driven by the work that all of you do, right? And in sharing with us what your successes are and what ain't working, right? How much more do we learn so often, right, from what didn't work than from what succeeded? So I am so grateful for everything you've done, you know, to help me personally in my job, and to help us at the State Library do a better job in what we do.
Greg, I want to thank you for being here and
Thank
sharing
you.
your leadership with us.